Okay, welcome back. We are talking about press regulation. We've thought about why we regulate and the impact of the work we do if it remains unregulated. We've talked about the brief history and the rise of IPSO, but how there's this tension between IPSO and the recommendations of the Leveson inquiry, which called for a basically state recognition of a regulator, and IPSO remains outside of that, which means that IPSO is not Leveson compliant, um, and therefore not recognised by the PRP, the Press Recognition Panel. And we saw that there was an alternative, Impress, which was the regulator set up by press reform groups, which is recognised, and the fact that there is a small, it might be small, but it's a recognised regulator, creates a little bit of a legal risk for the industry, even though the government has said it's not going to enact the most punitive powers that it was to punish any organisation that was outside of a recognised regulator. So anyway, the important thing is that you understand that IPSO is the main regulator of most aspects of what we do as press and online um, publishers, and the rulebook, which IPSO has is in charge of, is called the Editor's Code. Big thing to notice is where the apostrophe is in Editor's Code, more than one editor, of course. So a lot of people get that wrong. And that's the Editor's Code. It's a very short document, unlike for Ofcom and the Broadcast Code, which is a very long or much longer booklet. The Editor's Code remains as one side of A4. Pretty dense side of A4, but it's really worth having a look. So I do expect you to read this very early on in the program, because you need to know the rules under which we're operating. And even if you're a broadcaster, you will be publishing online, so you need to be able to operate within the IPSO Editor's Code in that domain. So you'll see there, just to highlight the areas of interest that it covers, so things like accuracy and privacy and harassment, how we report suicide, how we approach children, when we can approach children and talk to them, how we behave around hospitals, when it's right to use clandestine devices and subterfuge, when you can pose as somebody else or lie to somebody in order to entrap somebody, like the Sam Allardyce story. Those reporters posed as business people and used clandestine devices, a secret camera to film. So there's a whole range of areas which is covered. So make sure you read that Editor's Code. It's also interesting that there's a section at the end. When you look at the very end, the little blue panel there is all about the public interest, and you'll notice within that list of topics, there are a number which are which have an asterisk next to them, and that means that there's a possible exception to the basic rule on the grounds of public interest. But public interest isn't just anything which you think is worthy. There's a very specific definition of public interest. So make sure you get to understand what the public interest means. So fundamentally, it is about detecting or exposing crime, or the threat of crime, or of serious impropriety, things which might put public safety or health at risk. So make sure you are aware of where the edges of the public interest lie. It is a formal definition. It is not something you can just make up on the fly. So exceptions for public interest, and that is true for broadcasters as well when you're operating under the Ofcom code, but you need to look at that code separately, and as I say, there will be a separate online lecture for that. So that's the Editor's Code. It's really important you read that. There's no point me kind of reading it all out to you. You're perfectly capable of looking at that code. So spend some time getting to know it and understanding the regulations within which you must operate. These are in addition to the regulations or the restrictions we operate within due to the law. So there are a whole range of legal restrictions on what we do, and you'll be learning all about those, but whether that's defamation or contempt or copyright, sexual offences, dealing with juveniles, all of those restrictions operate as well. The IPSO Editor's Code is not a legal instrument, but it is a professional code which we must obey. So just to finish off by looking at some of the areas which are particularly problematic for us as journalists. So reporting of suicides is a very difficult area, and if you provide too much detail, you can run the risk of giving information to somebody else who might be vulnerable. So you need to consider how much detail you provide. The Samaritans have a very good guide on this, and they monitor this very closely. And if you publish something which they feel is providing too much information about a suicide, they will be down on you like a ton of bricks and making complaints, and probably justified in doing so. Secret filming is another area. You may feel you can just do it whenever you fancy, but you can't. You need to make sure you've got a public interest justification for that. Areas where you might intimidate people. If you allow your questioning to become intimidatory, you need to be careful. Doorstepping, so when you knock on the doors of people, whether you're trying to expose wrongdoing or you are seeking reaction after something has happened, quite often that can involve knocking on the door of somebody who's bereaved, and you need to be very careful with that, and the code has a lot to say about that. And also deciding on what material you can and can't use, particularly in the online environment. You may be working against a very tight deadline and trying to be first with something, but it may be shocking and you need to take a step back before using that. I've got some examples to show you. So we talked about Brooks Newmark. Remember him, the Tory minister who sent pictures of himself naked to somebody who he thought was a young Tory activist, and it turned out to be a Sunday Mirror reporter. There was complaints at the press. There was a complaint to the Independent Press Standards Organisation, the brand new IPSO as it was then, that the Sunday Mirror had overstepped the mark and they'd used subterfuge inappropriately, and there wasn't a public interest. See stories about that in some of those links, but have a look at that case. IPSO publishes its findings. In the end, they found that the Sunday Mirror had not breached it, but it caused a lot of controversy about whether the Sunday Mirror had gone too far in trapping Brooks Newmark in that way. Shocking images. I mean, these are US front pages, and it really is just to show that perhaps we do not have the most shocking images. I think it would be unlikely that those images would have been shown on the front page of any British newspaper. This was the murder of James Foley by Islamic State, by the Beatles as they became known. I don't think those pictures would have been used in the UK because of the regulatory framework within which we operate. This is a video which is quite shocking. I invite you to look at it in your own time. Choose to look. Let me describe it. But these slides will be available on Blackboard, so you can look at it. It's a helmet cam worn by a motorcyclist, and he's riding along, and a car pulls across in front of him, and it crashes, and he dies in that crash. The motorcyclist. So you decide whether you want to watch that video or not. And there's a question over how much you show. I mean, it was regarded as being a very shocking video. So Justin, if you had just taken that off social media and hadn't consulted the family, I would say that would be far too shocking to show. And I think IPSO would find against you for intruding into grief. However, in this case, it was released by the police with the permission of the family as a safety message. And in that case, IPSO would not find against you. So the same video, but because you had sought permission of the family, you would not be found to have contravened the clause which deals with intrusion into grief or providing shocking material. So have a look at that video if you choose. Some other examples. It's about treating people with respect. So some examples. Kate Stone, Dr. Kate Stone. So she was on a walking holiday in Scotland, and she was attacked by a stag and was gored by its antlers. Now, there was complaints made because of the way that a number of newspapers, including The Sun, treated her. So she was badly injured, and yet they focused on the fact that she had undergone gender reassignment. So she was typified as a sex swap scientist gored by stag. And there was a complaint, and The Sun held up its hands in the end and said, yeah, we shouldn't have focused on that element. There was no reason to, and that shows a certain change in the tone. You may not like everything that gets published by the press in the UK, but there is a definite shift to recognise certain sensitivities, and they ipso regard that as being a success, I think, in the way that they work with The Sun to maybe change the culture a little bit there. Lucy Meadows, absolutely tragic case. She was a teacher and in Accrington, and she returned to work after having lived as a man, returned to work as a woman, and it caused a huge amount of controversy that people complained, and Richard Littlejohn wrote a piece, shocking piece really, in which the headline was he's not only in the wrong job, he's not only in the wrong body, he's in the wrong job, he said. It caused a huge amount of controversy, and tragically in the middle of that controversy, Lucy Meadows killed herself. So again, it's just another example of how dreadful the consequences can be. Swine flu, it cost millions because of the controversy whipped up. The government ended up spending millions of pounds on a vaccine which was of no use. MMR, many parents didn't vaccinate their kids against MMR, and that's led to a rise in measles, mumps and rubella because of the vaccination, the anti-vax voice that was given too much priority in the press. So if we overstate things, that can cause a problem. I've been through those cases. Trial by media, people found guilty of crimes which they didn't commit by the media. So we've seen all of those examples. And then just my own experience, George Hearn always haunts me. He's a little boy who was found dead in his bedroom and who had a belt round his neck. The information that came to me as the editor was that he had hanged himself, and so I published it on the front page. Little boy 10 found hanged was the headline. It turned out it was a tragic accident with a belt that had self-tightened and he couldn't get it loose. And I spent a long time, and I still do, feeling enormously guilty for the damage I did to that family. And we did everything we could to try and heal it. But you imagine those parents who had lost their child dealing with a newspaper editor who had published that on his front page. Shocking, and I'm ashamed of it now. So press regulation really means making sure that you do the right thing, and that's always my message to you, is make sure you tell the truth, but make sure you tell the truth with honor and compassion. Absolutely key to you being a good journalist. So regulation, that's a quick gamble through press regulation. Feel free to contact me to ask any questions you might have about regulation. Make sure you read the ipso editor's code and make sure you stick to it. Thank you for your attention.